Welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. So tonight I'll be introducing Neil, who is Head of Cyber Essentials, to talk about education's introduction to Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, a process that I've been through myself. So I'm really excited to see what Neil's got to say. He's done a very successful talk for the group at the National Museum of Computing. That's really enjoyable and some really good, valuable information. So I'm really keen to see tonight. So if I can introduce Neil, who is Head of Cyber Essentials.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this presentation about Cyber Essentials. Now, it's a bit of a milestone one, this for me. This is, well, I've done a ridiculous amount of these this year, so this is my final one for 2024. So be very privileged that it's for this group. And as recently just mentioned, I recently presented for the group at the National Museum of Computing. It was a very enjoyable experience and a very engaged audience, and I really welcomed that day. It was fantastic to be part of. Okay, so Cyber Essentials is my core topic. Okay, so Cyber Essentials is the National Cybersecurity Centre's certification scheme. And I work for IASME, and we are the delivery partner for Cyber Essentials and have been now for over 4.5 years. We took over in April 2020. Previously, there was a scheme that was managed by 5 companies in total, one of which was IASME, but IASME has actually been involved in the creation of Cyber Essentials from the very beginning. Our CEO was involved with the creation way back in 2012, 2013, when it was first thought about. So we've been a very long-standing part of the Cyber Essentials program. So who am I? Well, I'm the head of Cyber Essentials, and I've had a very interesting journey to get here. So I've been in IT career, in IT support for 25 plus years, various roles in law firms and various MSP and IT services companies throughout the West Midlands area especially. But yeah, I've had a very, very varied career. So I came into IASME about, well, full-time 6 years ago, and started doing their IT support, but got involved in Cyber Essentials as previously I was an assessor and a Cyber Essentials Plus auditor, and got more and more involved in the supporting of the scheme from a technical level, and which has risen, given my career the opportunity to move on. And now I am chair of the technical working group that maintains the CE standard, working very closely with the NCSE, and we meet on a weekly basis to talk about the standard. And I'm also the technical author of the Cyber Essentials question set. So that's the touch point that everybody has when they get involved with the scheme. And it's that awful question set. Yeah, and I say awful because I wrote it. But it's that question set everybody has to deal with, and to obtain Cyber Essentials. And there's developments going on with that question set, so I'll touch on those later. One thing I do want to make quite clear is I like to be really approachable. So if you ever have any feedback or want to talk about Cyber Essentials or get me involved in anything, or me and my team, very happy to be contacted directly. As you can see my email address on screen right now. Okay, so what is Cyber Essentials about? Well, it's these things called commodity threats. These are the commodity threats that the NCSE talk about. So these are the ones that require low skills. Often the tools are very freely available and very easy to run. And with a little bit of, learning, they can be run quite easily from any location. And we often see, many types of people. It's not only organized gangs or hacking teams or whatever getting involved. We see individuals getting involved in this and practicing their skills, etc. So these are the easy to run cyber attacks, but let's remember that nearly all major cyber attacks start off with using the freely available and easy to use, cheap tools that are available out there. Because if you don't need to do something complicated and you can get access with those easy tools, well, just made their job a lot easier, isn't it? So the ones we're really interested in about social engineering and phishing, exploiting known vulnerabilities. So this is where you've got unpatched software and operating systems, and password guessing. So let's talk about the one that's missing off here, which is ransomware. Well, that's part of all of these really nowadays. So social engineering, especially, exploitation and of email systems, being able to send out those phishing emails, etc. They are often the touch point that starts a ransomware attack. And those are the kinds of things that Cyber Essentials is designed to prevent happening. And there's been lots of research into this in the last year, and lots of mentions in annual reports, etc., about the effectiveness of Cyber Essentials against such attacks as ransomware. So these commodity threats were actually thought about in Cyber Essentials as the beginning of Cyber Essentials 10 years ago when it was launched in June 2014. But these are still the common threats, the common commodity threats that are out there are being exploited on a day-to-day basis, even now in 2024. So nothing's really changed. It's the way perhaps they speeded up those attacks, or there's more tools freely available, but it's still those same attack vectors that they are carrying out these common cyber attacks through. So what they after? Well, theft of data, encryption of data to be awkward, causing disruption. Sometimes they're just running these attacks because of curiosity, and somebody's learning how to hack or learning and steps over the line. That could be a possible reason. But many of the tools that are available there are created by criminal gangs and just made freely available. And it was at the World Economic Forum in Davos. It was mentioned earlier this year that the cyber crimes are the third largest economy in the world. So there's only really China and the US in front of this now. So it comes about from ransomware, etc. The whole communities behind these criminal gangs who are running and creating cyber threats, etc. There are many large businesses involved. There are jobs advertised through the dark net, etc., about working for these criminal gangs. They have their own HR departments, they have their own recruitment departments, etc., etc. They're all very much run like a business, but with cybercrime at the forefront. So the third largest economy in the world, and that only gets fueled by things, as we say, like ransomware. And the advice is always never pay a ransom. The NCSC advice would always be never pay a ransom. But unfortunately, people do. And there's one on record in the US earlier this year where one business paid a $75 million ransom. And on anything recorded on that was they didn't really get much data back at all. So all it does when you pay a ransom is just fueling the economy of the cyber criminal community even further. So let's just remember only a small percentage of cyber attacks are actually targeted. So they actually go out in the first instance to target those organizations. Mainly they're all just untargeted attacks, just randomly trying IP addresses, etc., and identifying weaknesses within organizations by attacking them across the internet. So where does Cyber Essentials come into all this? Well, Cyber Essentials is a set of technical controls to help prevent an incident taking place. I'll come on to the controls shortly. Now, the Cyber Essentials controls and its bit of background are based on a threat intelligence and risk assessment carried out by the NCSC, formerly the CESG, when the Cyber Essentials was first created. So they maintain this and they keep looking at what kind of commodity threats are the issue commonly. And all we see is an increasing growth in commodity threats that I've talked about previously, featuring in that risk assessment. So the risk assessment really for, well, a risk judgment for any organization in the education sector or any sector is whether you apply the Cyber Essentials controls or you don't apply the Cyber Essentials controls. That's the risk judgment that needs to take place. So the scheme is 10 years old, and we're still having to protect for 10 years from against exactly the same cyber threats. And there was a big update to the scheme since the launch in January 2022, which reflected the change in working practices around more remote working and home working, and just that being prepared to work in a remote environment more often. But it should be seen as a foundation to any organization, any education establishment's cybersecurity levels. The 5 controls we'll talk about shortly are all very basic principles and controls that have been around for many, many years. But one thing is, Cyber Essentials is gaining more traction, it's more popular, it's being used in supply chains, it's being used, as I say, through the Department of Education are promoting Cyber Essentials. We know we're talking to the ESFA, and when linking it to funding, etc. And we're seeing significant growth in Cyber Essentials. So we have issued over 185,000 certificates. We actually issued the 100,000th certificate for Cyber Essentials in June 2022, and we are very close to issuing the 200,000 certificate in the next 4 to 6 weeks. That shows you the significant growth in the last 2.5 years. This is because it seemed to be linked to funding and supply chains more and more to give that level of assurance that the supply chain is protected from a cyber attack. So in the last 12 months alone, we've issued 44,000 certificates, and that is steadily rising every year at a rate of 20%. So what is it? It's a certification. Yes, that's the goal. That's what it's required. That's what's required by contract, by funding organizations. And what is also required, just to show that level of assurance to users, the systems, etc. It's a government-backed scheme. So yes, it's owned by the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. And they hold the policy, but it's owned by the NCSC, who look after the technical side of it. And IASME, we are here as partners to run the scheme on behalf of those 2 organisations. But the main thing, and this is the most important thing, it's about 5 technical controls that can help protect from a basic or commodity cyber attack from taking place. What are those 5 controls? Well, they're all very simple when you think about them, and that's the firewall and routers, secure configuration, security updates, access controls, and malware protection. So I'll go through these very quickly in a little bit more detail. So we're talking about firewalls and routers. Firewalls, yeah, they are the boundary to the internet. They are that thing that gives you the first layer of protection against those internet attacks. So what we like to see is that those devices and the operating systems that are on those firewalls are supported and receiving regular security updates, but all the inbound ports must be closed on those devices unless they have a documented business reason why they're open. When those ports are no longer required for those business reasons, they should be closed as soon as possible. All controls need to be applied to physical and software firewalls. So this applies when you're talking about your Windows 10, Windows 11 laptops, those kind of devices, when they're used off-site on a different network or in the home environment. They should have the software firewall applied, and again, blocking all inbound ports. So secure configuration is about removing the unrequired software and the accounts on those devices, and making sure there are none there that have been around for a long time or potentially give you vulnerabilities. So you could have a piece of installed software on there that's never used by the organization, forgotten about, and it sits there installed on the devices. And if it's not patched or updated or whatever vulnerability fixes available for it, could present an opportunity for a means of attack, a doorway in. So that's why we ask for those to be removed. We need an access PIN or password to unlock devices. And we need to see disable auto play or auto run in effect. Now, this has moved on a little bit because operating systems are by default turning off or making sure auto play and auto run are turned off by default. But it also now applies to web browsers as well. And depending on which web browser, making sure that if you download a piece of software, it doesn't auto run. Okay. These are all applied and, should be in place by default, but often they're also can be turned off in some scenarios, and they form this, their test is part C plus. It tests this auto run facility. Now, the big one that's in Cyber Essentials and causes a lot of debate is security updates. So security updates are really important to maintain the software you've got, the operating systems you've got, because you need to apply them as quickly as possible. Now, the figure of 14 days was set over 10 years ago when the scheme first started. Now, let's just remember that that was based on a figure that was saying, it takes about 15 days to exploit a vulnerability. So they settled on 14 days. Well, the speed of technology and the way vulnerabilities are promoted and published when they happen, often they're exploited a lot quicker. So there is some thought that maybe it should be reduced, but it's been decided to settle with 14 days of release. But let's just remember that what we would previously class as a complex attack that would be outside Cyber Essentials, okay, it's changed. Those exploited vulnerabilities that were more complex, needed more complex skills, etc., to run, actually turn into commodity attacks very quickly nowadays. If we go on record about a certain Microsoft Exchange vulnerability that Microsoft published way back in March 2021, that particular Microsoft Exchange vulnerability actually was very complex to run when it was first published and made public by Microsoft, but it became exploited within 4 days. And on day 7, it was being used to run as a commodity attack, and the code was readily available in various places, and ransomware was being run using that vulnerability. So the pace of change and how quick a complex vulnerability or a complex attack can turn into a commodity attack still means that the 14 days is incredibly relevant, because we still want people to patch, and it's still vital to keeping a system secure. Another area that can be slightly complex and difficult to understand is that use of different types of accounts. So this is your standard user account. They can be only used for day-to-day activities such as email, creating documents such as Excel and Word, just carrying out the normal day-to-day duties. Anything with administrative privileges for running administrative tasks of any kind, creating users, running software updates, installing software, should be on a separate account. This practice of keeping separate accounts is very effective against ransomwares when they're asking to try and run some encryption software from a link, etc. You want those, you want a second login box to come up, and that should raise questions of whether, whether, you should be putting a second set of details into your laptop or desktop to install something. It should raise that question point, because you shouldn't be asked for that if you click on a link. But that does mean, by asking for that second set details, if you are asked for it and made to think like that, it makes you go, oops, something's wrong. Okay, but that means it stops the ransomware from running automatically. So that is something really effective. And that's something that's proven within Cyber Essentials. So all these controls I'm talking about here, they are designed to block the commodity common cyber attacks, at least 80%, and there's some thought it's around 90% of all common cyber attacks are now prevented by applying or blocked or hindered from applying the controls of Cyber Essentials. Now, any service that is in the cloud should have multi-factor authentication turned on where available. It's a must, really, in Cyber Essentials. It's one of these elements of Cyber Essentials and the controls that can be used and tested within the CE Plus audit, but it's highly effective against blocking access and attacks against cloud services by applying multi-factor authentication. Now, it's particularly difficult within the education sector. We are aware of that. But the Department of Education are talking about this more and more. I talk to the Department of Education and they see the massive benefits of applying multi-factor authentication. So this is an area that we will see more and more developments about. So access control generally, there will be a lot more focus on this in future changes to Cyber Essentials. There are lots of policy discussions going on about authentication methods and how it needs to move on away from just being the standard username and password going forward. It needs to have this layer of multi-factor authentication, even going as far as addressing it with passkeys. That's something else that's being discussed. But anything you can do to just make the attacker's life harder to attack those accounts by having that extra piece of information required, such as through multi-factor, is going to be a big benefit to any organization establishment when protecting their cloud services. Malware protection. Okay, pretty standard this one really, but it needs to be installed and in line with the vendor's best practices. Where mobile devices such as tablets or mobile phones are used in the networks and environment, you need to create a list of approved software and make sure they're the only ones that are permitted to be used on those mobile devices. So what is in scope for Cyber Essentials? Okay, everything you see within the green box on the screen right now. So that's your computers, if you use thin clients, if you've got laptops, if you've got servers, etc. in the environment, if you've got cloud servers, etc. They're all in scope for Cyber Essentials. Now, what's common between all of them? They must all be running a supported operating system. Okay, that supported operating system must have a published end of life date if possible. We know it's difficult in the Apple world to get that, but there should be a published end of life date so you know when it no longer receives security updates. This is most important, that everything is supported for that very reason. Anything that's not supported no longer and has an old operating system, end of life operating system, or however you look at it, cannot be in the scope of Cyber Essentials. That does not mean you can't use them, but you need to take them away from the internet. That's a second hop by network segregation. For the purposes of scoping of Cyber Essentials, those end-of-life unsupported operating systems and software need to be segregated by what's called and created in what's called a subset for the purposes of Cyber Essentials by a use of a firewall or a VLAN to take them away from the internet. Having that second hop away from the internet is a vastly more complicated attack. And that's how it should be dealt with within Cyber Essentials. So why Cyber Essentials? It's resilient against online threats, right? This is where we had loads of stats coming in this year about Cyber Essentials. There's been more research done on Cyber Essentials, all part of its 10th anniversary celebration this year. So, as I previously said, It was always known about 80% resilient against online threats or common cyber attacks or commodity threats. And it's believed to be around the 90% mark. There's been loads of research done on this and updated this year. There's also lots of evidence from insurance stats from the insurance sector to say that if you have cyber insurance and combined with cyber essentials, you're 92% less likely to make a claim against your cyber insurance. That's a real confidence boost for cyber essentials. You know, these simple measures, when applied correctly, can be a really great preventative measure to stop a cyber attack. Also, it provides funding opportunities. We're seeing that with the college sector at the moment. It's being required through colleges by the ESFA and being linked to the funding. And also it's being seen for data protection regulations as well. So the ICO use the controls of cyber essentials to measure the technical and organizational measures in place for Article 5 and Article 32, the GDPR. And when they get a data breach reported, one of the first areas they're asking their investigators to look at are the controls of cyber essentials in place. And there have been fines and warnings issued about not having the controls in place. So they are actively using this to try and protect everybody's data as well. So it's a two-part certification. Okay, so there's the verified self-assessment where you fill out a questionnaire, which is signed off by a board member or a governor, etc. But it's independently marked by a trained assessor, and they mark the answers and then provide feedback. But you need to be compliant in nearly all questions to pass Cyber Essentials. Now, Cyber Essentials Plus, this is where an audit is carried out, and they carry out, it's a total of 7 tests outlined, and the assessor can either visit the location or carry out the remote audit. But it is just an audit of the answers given in the verified self-assessment to make sure the controls have been put in place and they are being effective. So they will run tests against the multi-factor authentication. They will check for account separation. They will check for auto run of potentially files that are being downloaded that could be viruses or malware. They are checking for auto run of those files. There's also an internal vulnerability scan and an external vulnerability scan. So they're the tests. So there's really no difference between Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. So, but in practice, it is being communicated, being seen different, and we often receive, feedback. There are extra controls in CE Plus. Just to make clear, there are no extra controls. Okay, but really, if you're doing the self-assessment and then you come to do CE Plus, if that's what you decide for your establishment, those controls, you should have them in place at the self-assessment, and you should be able to go ahead with the CE Plus very quickly afterwards. There is, depending on the turnover of your organization, a level of cyber insurance included within the assessment. Okay, so if you've got 20 million turnover or less, you can get this cyber insurance. Now, this is the cyber insurance that has provided the wonderful stat about 92% less likely to make a claim. Now, the product that's included with Cyber Essentials by AIG is also sold as a product, a standalone product for companies that don't have Cyber Essentials. And they see a vastly reduced amount of claims made against the insurance. And we've been running this insurance for 2 years. I think there's been 20 claims made in total against it. And there's been many hundreds of claims made against the standalone product when they don't have Cyber Essentials. So when you're comparing a like-for-like very like-for-like product, but just sold in a different way, when you link it to Cyber Essentials, that's where we're getting that wonderful stat from. I'll say it was promoted at Cyber UK. What you are going to hear and see, and if everybody's read the National Cyber Security Annual Report 2024, Cyber Essentials is being seen as really effective. It's being talked about more and more in government. It's being talked more and more by the NCSC. I say alone, we used to have real difficulty getting it mentioned in the national report. Last week it was in the national report and mentioned 36 times. So, that just shows you how Cyber Essentials is being talked about more and more and being seen as very effective against the common cyber attacks. Okay, so I've touched on data protection regulations earlier, especially about using appropriate technical and organizational measures. But where can you get advice? You can get advice from our wonderful group of cyber advisors. We've got 103 of these, and they are involved with 97 assured service providers. So they're assured their services with the NCSC. So these are people who are experts in applying the hands-on IT configuration and implementation of Cyber Essentials controls. These are often very experienced people who've worked in the industry for many years and understand Cyber Essentials really well. Now, they are associated there with these 97 ASPs. All this information is readily available on the IASME website and with the scheme owners, the NCSC. And there will be a register of all cyber advisors on the NCSC website going forward. We have a readiness tool which helps you prepare for Cyber Essentials. Now, this can be tailored by sector, and one of the sectors it is tailored for is the education sector. It's currently going through revamp because the tool's been around for 4 years, but we are updating it and expect a new updated version of the readiness tool to provide you with a gap analysis of areas you might be lacking in and help you prepare for a Cyber Essentials assessment. And a really big tool that I want to talk about, I'm very proud of, is the Cyber Essentials Knowledge Hub. So the Knowledge Hub was published back in February of this year, and it's a free access resource all about Cyber Essentials available on the IASME website. And it's to help you through the certification process. So there's loads of information about different scenarios as defined controls. Lots of information, and this page is the one that's getting loads of hits about operating system support. So we try to demystify all those awkward pages of exactly when an operating system goes end of life. So this information is readily available on there. It's all there free to access, but this really is the page getting the hits. We publish scheme advisories. So if we have to make a mid-cycle announcement about Cyber Essentials about how the controls are applied or how the scheme is applied, it will be updated through the Cyber Essentials Knowledge Hub. Lots of information about scoping. Scoping of assessments is the most common area we have within Cyber Essentials. We get about 85% of all our calls. It is difficult, but that's because we're talking about scoping has technical boundaries, and it's slightly different to how you would do perhaps an ISO 27001 audit, where we don't allow, by division or whatever, we're actually looking for network boundaries or boundaries that are protected by firewalls. They are your boundaries of your scope. We have sector-specific guidance. Now, in particular, we have a whole section here about the education sector. Some of this has been written in line with the Department of Education, and we are working with them closely now, and we are looking to align some of their guidance with our guidance and the NCSC's to tailor it better for the education sector. So please check that out. So we have some changes coming up. So Cyber Essentials, we try to move with the times a little bit and assess what threats can be protected or whether there's any technology developments that need to be aligned into Cyber Essentials. So we published a new set of changes on the 23rd of September this year. It goes live next April, so that's a week after Easter on the 28th. We've given a longer notice period on these than we normally do. It used to be 3 months. We've now given 7 months. But it has a new associated question set, which is called Willow. Now, give you the background. The previous question set since we've been sole partner has been Beacon, Montpellier, Evandine, and now Willow. These are all names of springs in the Malvern Hills. They're in fact the 4 closest springs to our offices in the Malvern Hills. So that's just a bit of background there why they've got those names. There's more guidance in Willow linked to the CE Knowledge Hub, and that means we can provide more up-to-date guidance on how to apply the controls related to the questions, but also the control requirement taken from the official NCSE document has been put into the question guidance as well. So what are those changes? Well, we're now accepting passwordless authentication methods. That's because the vastly changing world of authentication is taking place. You know, we're vastly moving away from password and username alone. We are having to look at new methods and adopt them within the scheme. We haven't abandoned password and username only at the moment, but there is a lot of development going on with Microsoft and AWS and Google around this area, and we now need to start looking at this area and adopting the new methods that are out there. Security update management, there is a change here, and it's around vulnerability fixes. Vulnerability fixes are more and more than patches and updates. So we have these patches and updates, which has been the traditional method to fix them, but we're getting more by registry fix, configuration change, and scripts. There was a big one earlier this year, which affected certain versions of Microsoft Exchange, which actually needed a feature installing that provided protection against a 9.8 vulnerability. So there is a new definition about vulnerability fixes and when they should be applied. So that's there. And then really a section about home working, which has had to be renamed to home and remote working because we were getting a little bit of play on words. So some remote workers weren't being included in assessment. There is a change to anybody who does the CE Plus audit, but this really is something that affects the assessors rather than the organisation being tested. Okay, it's about their retention of their data and how they can tell us how they did their scoping and sampling of the CE Plus audit. Okay, and coming to the end, so there's some time for questions and answers very shortly, but I hope you're all aware of the Windows 10 updates that they will be unsupported from this year, but there is an extended security update program for the education sector. We'll share these slides afterwards, and there's a link there. You get a vastly reduced fee for this program compared to the general business sector. So I've just looked it up before this. It's be £1 for the first year, £2 for the second year, and then £4 for the third year for these extended security updates. But of course, what Microsoft are really trying to do is get you all to move to Windows 11 as soon as possible. So, you know, that should be in the back of your minds. Just also remember that on the same day, there are a number of major Microsoft products also going end of life, which includes Microsoft Exchange. That won't be on premise, available for on premise unless you're willing to pay an awful lot of money going forward. And a number of Microsoft Office products that you used to be able to buy and install not through a cloud service, also going end of life on that date. So just be aware of those going forward. Okay, so in summary, it's the foundation of anybody's cybersecurity plan, and I'd employ that you all look at trying to apply these controls in your establishments. It is effective. There's so much research out there and two major reports this year showing how effective it is against the common cyber attacks. And it is only a few small technical changes, really, but it's difficult at scale. We know that. But these small little changes can make so much difference and inhibit or even block completely these common cyber attacks taking place. There's loads of help available. So we've got the Knowledge Hub, the Readiness Tool, we've got cyber advisors. So we have nearly 400 certification bodies, which amounts to about 1,000 Cyber Essentials assessors in the UK. And of course, you can come to IASME as well. So happy to help there. But yeah, questions and answers. But please follow us on social media for updates about Cyber Essentials. And thank you for your time. But yeah, I'm sure there's some questions come in.
Thank you for that, Neil. That was really good. So yeah, we've had quite a few questions come in. So I'll just run through them. Are there any intentions to create a CE assessment that's more fit for purpose for education?
There are no plans at the current time to do a separate one for education, etc., because it is so even the guidance from the Department of Education is checked over by the NCSC, believe it or not. There is some joined up thinking. And these are seen as the most common or the best controls that can prevent a cyber attack from taking place. I think where we all struggle really is the unsupported operating systems, and we know that's around. But if you could at least try and put these controls in place, you're in a better position. But I don't think there's any plans at this current time to create a separate question set for the education sector.
Okay, thank you. So we've had a couple on MFA, which is always a hot topic. We have MFA turned on for staff. How do we do that for our pupils?
Well, this is the challenging area, isn't it? We know this is a problem for students, full stop, is to get them to adopt MFA. It's going to depend on which vendor and what options they've got available. It is something that I'm actually opened up a conversation with the Department of Education recently. I want to talk to them about it because, of course, we know there's the issue around smartphones and they want to ban smartphones in the classroom, in the school environment. It is something I can't give you an answer where we are about MFA, but I can tell you there are active conversations going on about this, and it's something that is a hot topic and it needs addressing, and we need to look at how we do it. These kind of conversations that I have, I'm working now with ANME, etc., which are very much welcome. I learn a lot about Cyber Essentials and how it's applied by talking to your communities. So I'm very happy to hear your challenges, etc., about this, and it helps us develop the scheme going forward.
Brilliant. There was another question there about mobile phones being banned, but I think you touched on that there. So what system access do auditors require to perform Cyber Essentials Plus audit?
So this will depend on so it can either be done remotely or it can be done on site. Okay, there will be a terms of engagement signed between you and the CB when you carry out, and they will discuss with you what level of access they require. So they'll need to do an external vulnerability scan on your IP addresses, your external facing IP addresses, and then they will need to do a authenticated scan on a sample of devices in your organization. And then they will carry out those tests against them. So it'll all be done, working with you as the organization, and they will have this terms of engagement with you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. Another question, you touched on the cover for the RPA insurance. So somebody's asked, is that the turnover of the individual school, or is the £20 million the turnover of the trust?
Well, this is difficult because the RPA have offered their own, haven't they, own insurance. So there is a level of insurance with the Cyber Essentials as well. So it would be, it depends how it's certified. So if it's an individual school that's certified, the Cyber Essentials insurance is 20 million turnover for that school. If it's a MAT, it would be 20 million for the MAT.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The firewall is managed and under the control of the ISP or a third party. How do we quantify the ports available, etc.?
That is a difficult one. Okay, this is common in the education sector, isn't it? I know this is common in business sector, but the normal advice, if you had a managed firewall in the business sector, would be put your own in place because you don't have a great deal of control over it. It's slightly different, isn't it? I do know of education authorities who run it on behalf of the schools, so it may be a conversation you need to have with them. I think this is an area that needs more conversations about who has control over the internet connection. It is a conversation that needs to be opened up, but depending on how many devices an organization, if you've really got no control over it, you need to configure software firewalls, and then that becomes more complex, vastly more complex setup, or vastly more complex to do a CE plus as well, actually, to rely on software firewalls. So it's an area that needs looking at, and I'm happy to learn from your community about how you deal with this as well.
Okay, thank you. As a trust of 48 schools, all on an MPLS connection, do we ensure all schools are CE ready and the accreditation is done as a single trust entity, or do we need to be certificating each school?
If they're all managed in an identical way, they can all be on the same certificate. If they're not, if they're managed individually and different ways of controlling it on site, they'd have to be split up slightly. We have had Matt come to us in the past because we did do an RPA scheme several years ago where we talked about this, where some part of the Matt could cover half the schools on one certificate, but the other half couldn't because they just onboarded them and had different systems in place, etc. This is where it's difficult. Cyber Essentials is difficult to scope because it's based on the individual technical boundaries in place. So it's one of those ones you may need to have a conversation either with the certifying body who is carrying out the assessment, or you can log a call with the Cyber Essentials team at IASME who can talk and discuss this further.
Brilliant. Thank you. So another question is, we have obtained quotes from 2 companies for CE Plus certification, both £3,800 per annum, with little or no consultancy included. Is that price normal? If so, are there any plans to make CE Plus more affordable to MATS academies schools?
Okay, so there is a set price for Cyber Essentials Plus, but that's only the certification element that they have to include. Now, the certifying bodies involved with Cyber Essentials are free to charge for their consultancy time, and it depends how much consultancy they want in place. I can't really comment individually about CBs and their pricing in an open forum, but I'd be happy to have a discussion in the background, because I will say if there's no consultation included in there, that may seem a bit excessive. We'll say, yes. But happy to have this conversation offline about that.
Thank you. Colleges are now required to complete Cyber Essentials as part of their EFSA funding. Is this something that may include secondary schools in the near future?
I can't answer that. I can't answer it because I don't know. Then we don't know how successful the college scheme's going to be. I think they've chosen the college sector because that's the smallest sector at the moment. There's the smallest number of education establishments in the college sector than smaller than higher education, smaller than secondaries, smaller than primaries. So I think that's where they've gone. And I know they're facing challenges with the colleges at the moment. Partly because of engagement with the NCSE, but also an engagement with you guys, the door has suddenly opened to me and the Department of Education only in the last 3 weeks. So I'm establishing a relationship with them about Cyber Essentials, and I may have answers in the future. I'm going to do another session on CE.
Thank you. These questions are similar to what we've just answered, but I'll say it anyway.
Yeah.
For a MAT of 20 schools, it could cost almost £10,000 plus to get Cyber Essentials accredited. My understanding is they're awarded per school, not per organisation. Are there any plans for tiered pricing to make this more attractive to MATs with multiple schools?
Well, you can certify just the MAT if the MAT is administered identically across if all the schools are managed identically across the MAT. That would be under one certificate. It's when they're, because obviously I understand, I'm always learning myself about this. So sometimes a MAT will onboard a new school, but for a year that new school's not going to be integrated. IT systems are not going to be integrated into the MAT, so it would need a separate certificate. There are many scenarios here. It all depends on the technical setup. So we are trying to educate a number of CBs in how MATs are configured, becomes more specialist in this area, because we know it's important to understand the scoping. We have the same challenges around organizations like this with managed offices in the business world, with barristers' chambers, where the chamber offers the IT services, but all the end user devices are owned by sole traders. It's a similar knock-on effect. It really depends who has got overall admin control and whether it's the policies are applied in the same way across it. And that can only be judged as part of the engagement with the certifying body or talking to IASME, and we can help and provide more guidance. What we're finding is no MAT is set up the same and no school set up the same, which is just reflected across the whole IT sector, full stop.
Thank you. So last question. We use conditional access to allow users to sign in without MFA when using one of our school networks. Will this pass CE?
Conditional access is currently allowable as a form of MFA. There is a slight curveball on this, very slight curveball. Right, it used to talk about conditional access in the NCSE's previous guidance about MFA. It talked about using trusted IPs, etc., as conditional access. That is still allowable in Cyber Essentials, but I did mention that things are changing in the authentication world, and unfortunately attackers are starting to attack conditional access. So is it the right thing? Well, the latest guidance, and this is what the curveball was, guys. On the 23rd of September, we launched the new Cyber Essentials requirements. On the 26th of September, without the Cyber Essentials team being aware, they launched a new multi-factor authentication and took out conditional access. So it threw us a curveball. We have discussed it. We're going to allow conditional access for the meantime, but it is something in the future that won't be allowable for Cyber Essentials, but we're not there yet. We're not there for 12 months at least. It'll probably be longer than that. That's all I can say on that. But conditional access is allowed. We are aware of this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Neil. That's all the questions that came in. So thank you very much for your time and for putting that presentation together. That was really helpful. And I think it's brilliant that you want to engage with the education sector.
We've been wanting to do it for a long time, but it's just great that we now have the contacts to do it. And they're most welcome, perhaps just doing like a straight workshop in the future. And if people want to prepare their questions and think about their own scenarios, be very happy to just do an hour's worth of Q&A now and again. That would be something I think would be a benefit to everybody. I get a lot of benefit from these sessions myself. I learn a lot, and it really does help us tailor our guidance and work out how we need to cover certain scenarios in Cyber Essentials. And that's something I'm hoping we can take to the Department of Education and the NCSE and talk about and open up the discussion about security within schools and the education sector generally.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Neil. And
Yeah,
thank you for
thank
everybody
you.
for joining us.